Welcome everyone to the current session, Basic Income, Inequality and Poverty 2. Today, unfortunately, Luiz Gustavo de Cunha de Souza is not able to join us due to personal problems. So Shania Fisher will present the paper Breaking Cycles of Intergenerational Trauma and Poverty, the potential impact of basic income in Canada's child welfare system. After her, Fernando Freitas, Paul Coates, and Jessica Maldonado will present Who Deserves the Most, Stigma and Consolidation as a Right of a Citizen, Basic Income in Marica. And after, Leah Hamilton will present Understanding the Long-Term Impact of Basic Income, Insights from a Houseboat Pilot. I remember to all the speakers that they have 15 minutes, and after we will have space for the questions. And I think in this case, Shania Fisher, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will pull up my screen here. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today. It is an honor to be here. My name is Shania Fisher, and I will be presenting on behalf of the Basic Income Canada Youth Network today on the potential impact of a basic income for Canada's child welfare system. Before we dive in, I just want to introduce myself and BICYN to you all. So BICYN is a network of people under 35 who volunteer their time and expertise to advocate and celebrate the benefits of a basic income. I have recently completed my social justice and human rights degree, and I sit as a director on the steering committee of the Basic Income Canada Youth Network. I have several years of experience working with vulnerable youth and their families, and so I'm very, very passionate about breaking cycles of intergenerational trauma and poverty through reforming the child welfare system. I just want to take a moment to thank my steering committee members, with a special thank you to co-chairs Kendall David and Chloe Halpany, and director Alexandra Zanes, who co-authored this project with me. I want to start with a story of youth that I encountered when I was working in a group home that is run by the foster care system. So at this treatment program, there was a girl named Caitlin. She came to this program from her father's home. He was a single father. He had one other child. Both children were extremely high needs. Her brother had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and Caitlin was impulsive and aggressive. For any parent, the emotional and physical outbursts of these two children would be difficult, but for a single father who had to work 14 hours a day in order to meet his family's basic needs, it was impossible. It was our team's job to address Caitlin's behavior in such a way that she would be successfully able to return home. She wanted to go home. Her dad was always willing and wanting to have her home as well. But the reality was that Caitlin was never going to be able to return home. Because her dad had to work such long days, it left him unable to properly supervise and care for his children and maintain the house at a suitable and safe level. Meanwhile, I learned from my boss that the government was paying upwards of $800 per day to house Caitlin in this treatment facility. She had all of her basic needs met, but her socio-emotional development was being fostered by a group of 20-something years old, myself included. It felt wrong that I was being paid an annual salary to care for this child, but her father was not afforded that same grace. I knew that something had to change. Caitlin's story is sadly not unique. It is not the only story I encountered where my salary and my program were funded better than the family's salaries and their homes. I want to give a brief overview on the child welfare system in Canada for those who may not be familiar. It is provided by provincial and territorial governments. There is some variation in terms of specific laws and policies. However, as a whole, the system is responsible for protecting children who are at risk of harm or in need of care, and also tries to support families to ensure the safety and well-being of their children and themselves. Typically, families will come into contact with child welfare services when reported by a professional like a doctor or a member of the public, like a neighbor. When a report is made, child welfare services will conduct an assessment or investigation to determine if a child is at risk of harm or in need of care. Then they will intervene if necessary. This might include providing supports for the families or making other arrangements for their care by removing the child from the home. Whenever possible, child welfare services seeks to return the child to their home, but if the underlying issues cannot be resolved, the child will be placed permanently in an alternate care arrangement. So I think it's important that we highlight why we care about this issue. And it's because of the negative consequences that this system has, which spans across generations. So children with previous child welfare involvement are more likely to be homeless, less likely to succeed academically. They have greater criminal involvement and are more likely to be involved in sex trafficking. In other words, they grow up to live lives in poverty, most of them do. And then when they have children, these children are also more likely to be apprehended by child welfare services, which is why this creates this cycle of intergenerational trauma and poverty. The system is also, as I say, riddled with racism. Child welfare system was built on the legacy of colonization in Canada and continues to uphold values of racism and assimilation today. So the systematic removal of Indigenous children and youth from their homes is an important and defining part of Canada's history and identity. And this is really important for this presentation because it is also the foundation on which the child welfare system was built. I want to share this quote with you by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper in his hallmark apology for residential schools on behalf of Canada as a means of showing how this system has morphed into the child welfare system today. So bear with me here. He says, two primary objectives of the residential school system were to remove and isolate children from the influence of their homes, families, traditions, and cultures, and to assimilate them into dominant culture. He says these objectives are based on the assumption that Aboriginal cultures and spiritual beliefs were inferior and unequal. We now recognize that it was wrong to separate children from rich and vibrant cultures and traditions, and that it created a void in many lives and communities. We now recognize that in separating children from their families, we undermine the ability of many to adequately parent their own children and sowed the seeds for generations to follow. Not only did you suffer these abuses as children, but as you became parents, you were powerless to protect your own children from suffering that same experience. And for this, we are sorry. So we can see the overlapping themes between the residential school system and the child welfare system, such as separation, undermining parental capacity, disempowerment, and intergenerational consequences. And this is apparent in the disproportionate rates of Indigenous and racialized youth in care. 54% of children in care are Indigenous, despite only accounting for 8% of the population. Black children are 28% more likely to be placed in care than white children. And this is all convoluted with the fact that Indigenous and racialized groups in Canada experience the highest rates of poverty. So rather than working towards reconciliation and improving the conditions of these marginalized groups, child welfare services labels their situations as neglectful. This is often because child welfare workers in our current system view parental capability requirements through a Western, European, and colonial lens. So as we can see here, the child welfare system continues to disproportionately target racialized families who are also more likely to have lower socioeconomic status. And there is a well-documented relationship between poverty and neglect in the child welfare system. Even just taking the definitions of these two words, poverty exists where people lack access to sufficient material and financial resources to thrive. Neglect generally consists of when a family member who has duty to care for a person fails to provide that person with basic needs, which includes material and financial resources. It's also evidenced in the fact that 37% of child welfare investigations in Ontario involve children whose parents received social assistance, worked part-time jobs, or worked multiple jobs. So although there are instances where intervention via apprehension might be important or necessary, it also represents a really narrow range of supports that are within the purview of child protection agencies. The separation of children from their families is a band-aid solution to neglect and maltreatment, and this type of intervention leaves unaddressed the broader range of resources and supports necessary for families to thrive and care for their children. So many families struggling with poverty may be, or at least appear to be, unable to adequately provide for their child or young person's basic needs. Those who are living in low-income households experience disproportionate rates and depth of food insecurity, precarious housing. They're less likely to afford needs like prescriptions, dental care, transportation. They also might work several jobs or hold employment where they can't afford to take fewer shifts or spend time in the home, like we saw with Caitlin's dad. So in essence, poverty looks like neglect, and removing the self-determination for families to provide for themselves leaves a great deal of bias and subjectivity in our systems of who is deserving of support and who isn't. So rather than looking at child protection, we instead need to look more holistically at family protection, providing a safety net that keeps both children and families free from poverty and trauma. And one piece of this solution is a basic income. This project was inspired by the Case for Basic Income series by Coalition Canada, where each brief identifies issues and concerns specific to a certain sector, but the common thread that runs through them all is income security and how a basic income would enable many people to improve their security and well-being. When I found out about this series, I immediately thought about the case for child welfare and how a basic income will undoubtedly reduce the number of children in care, empower families, and help break cycles of intergenerational poverty and trauma. So in this brief, we argue that in order to address the real challenges that poor families face, a more robust and comprehensive system of supports to promote autonomy and dignity is necessary. Although symptoms of poverty like food insecurity and housing precarity may be viewed by child protection agencies as evidence of neglect, the tools that child protection typically wields will never be able to solve the root of the problem when that root of the problem is in fact poverty. Basic income would directly address the root cause of poverty, a lack of income. Instead of relying on complicated and stigmatizing policies and programs to address its symptoms, an effective basic income should guarantee everyone in Canada an adequate income above the poverty line, replacing certain types of programs while working alongside other important social supports like affordable housing and healthcare programs. And there's evidence to support that a basic income would really do a lot for the child welfare system. So for example, the Manitoba Healthy Baby Program gave expecting moms a monthly check, and there was some evidence from the study to suggest that this benefit was associated with a reduced likelihood of an infant being taken into care. The Canada Child Benefit is an income-tested program for families with children under the age of 18, and this has reduced poverty for several thousand, 100,000 children, and has also raised income, reduced food insecurity, and improved living conditions of families. There's also been a recent study that has modeled that poverty reduction policies have the potential to reduce child welfare investigations by 11 to 19% per year, and also has the potential to reduce racial disproportionality in the child welfare system. So the bottom line here is that implementing a guaranteed livable income is an important policy step to ensure that no child in Canada is unnecessarily removed from their homes due to poverty. In a country as wealthy as Canada, no parent should have to make the choice between food or rent, medication, or the heating bill. The best thing that we can do to ensure Canada is a vibrant and healthy country is to invest in families so that no one has to make the impossible choices just to survive, and so that everyone has the right to grow up and live within the safety of their family, home, and community. Thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you to the Basic Income Earth Network for hosting me, and again to BICYN. I know questions and things will come later, but we really appreciate the questions, comments, and any suggestions as we work on this brief. And we have some contact information there if you want to keep in touch. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Shania, for your nice presentation. Fernando Freitas, Paul Katz, and Jessica Maldonado, the floor is yours.
Okay, I will share the presentation. Hello everyone, this article is a product of the Maricá Sizing Basic Income Evaluation, a research project conducted by the Fluminense Federal University in Brazil and the Jainfamily Institute in New York. I am Jessica Maldonado, a PhD student at Fluminense Federal University, and the other two actors are Fernando Freitas, a PhD student at Fluminense Federal University, and Paul Katz, who works at the Jainfamily Institute, but they could not come today, so I will present. And Fernando is the main actor. Now let's start with the analysis of stigma and discrimination in the city-size basic income of Maricá, a city located in the state of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. To start, I will first introduce some concepts about cash transfer. Then I will say a few words about the object of study and the purpose of the article. I will bring the literature review and the data methodology, and also the results of our analysis based on interview with implementers, beneficiaries, and non-beneficiaries. And then I will conclude the presentation. So, as conditional cash transfer becomes widespread in the world since the 1990s, a lot of criticism has been accumulated. First, there is a high administrative cost, and it's difficult to track income variations of people, especially for underdeveloped countries with a large informal labor market. So it's difficult to assure there will be no inclusion or exclusion errors. And that is also the problem with conditionalities, programs such as workfare or conditional cash transfers or health or education assumes that the beneficiary doesn't know what is better for him and make the right of having income conditional to a specific behavior. And depending on how conditionalities are applied, it's possible that it reduces the take-up rate in the program due to the increase of stigma, physical and psychological costs that is associated with the bureaucracy. And there is also the problem with stigma. If the policymaker makes a cash transfer focus only on poorest to make these people suitable to a label. So other groups of the society may not benefit from the program and therefore may not support it. So as Vampire and Vanderbilt point out, there is a possible solution for this criticize on conditional cash transfer, and it's on universal basic income. Because universal basic income, as we know, has a simplified implementation with no means tests or no conditionalities, and the income is assured by right for a large portion of the population, perhaps all individuals. And the evidence for social policy points out that if more people use the program or know people who benefit from it, then the support to the program will be bigger and beneficiaries will probably receive less stigmatization. And this brings us to the research question to be tested in Maricá program. This cash transfer was created as a higher focus minimum income program with conditionalities in the time benefiting 10% of the poorest local city sizes, and went to a program that benefits 25% of the population with no conditionalities. So the research question is, did the transition from a minimum income program to a program broadly targeted without informal conditionalities favor the mitigation of stigma? So in the beginning, the minimum income program was created in 2013, guaranteed 70 mumbucas per household, for a strictly income-focused group. It is paid in a local currency that has the same value as the real, the Brazilian currency, and can be spent freely. And it's now accepting more than 13,000 businesses through the city. And between 2013 and 2019, there was a gradual expansion in the number of beneficiaries and the value of benefits. And in 2019, there was an expansion to 42,000 beneficiaries. And now they receive 200 mumbucas per person with no conditionalities. So the transition in 2019 was a transition from a family cash transfer to an individual cash transfer. So each person in the family received 200 mumbucas. So in order to enroll in the city-size basic income, 2 steps are necessary. First, the person needs to register in Cadastro Único. There is a federal database for social policy in Brazil, and the eligibility criteria to be in the Cadastro Único is have a household income threshold of 3 times the minimum wage, which consists of around 4,000 reais. This is an income that is quite representative of the Brazilian average income, and Cadastro Único is the same entrance door for Bolsa Família program. There is a large cash transfer in Brazil. But in the case of Bolsa Família, there is Bolsa Família is targeting on extremely low income. So after the first step in the Cadastro Único, the potential beneficiary must register in the local database from the Secretariat of Solidarity Economy, and also prove that lives in Maricá for at least 3 years. However, there is some caveats. There is a wave enrollment. Sometimes the enrollment is up, but it's mostly closed. So as you can see here in this image, there were 3 main waves of enrollment, and potentially eligible individuals in 2019 was 59,000, but 17,000 was not included. And now in 2023, that is 101,000 eligible individuals, but 6,000 are not included. And there is also other cash transfer in the city. In April of 2023, the city has created the Work Protection Program, which benefits around 50,000 individuals focused on cooperative self-employed work. Its main component guarantees 650 mumbucas per household. And there is also the Food Allowance Program that benefits 6,000 beneficiaries who are direct and indirect employers of the city hall. And all benefits received in the city can be spent freely in more than 13,000 businesses in the city of all kinds. In total, there are around 8,000 accounts to use the Mumbuca currency, which represents 40% of the population in Maricá, with the city-size basic income being the biggest problem. I will present a little about our theoretical framework, where we try to identify the significant challenges associated with policy implementation. And we note that a crucial aspect is the role of street-level bureaucrats who can strongly influence the success of the program due to their discretionary power. So they have direct contact with policy users and other ones responsible for distributing sanctions and benefits. And the bureaucracy often faces the challenge of dealing with unexpected circumstances and also with limited resources. So in such situations, discretion becomes a crucial tool for bureaucrats because it allows them to allocate goods and services as they believe to be correct and make judgments on the deservings of recipients. And in this context of limited resource, the correlation between discretion and stigma becomes evident, as we will see in the implementers interview. Because bureaucrats often rely on moral judgment as means to make decisions, and when they try to justify the decision, they usually use stigma. So in our data and methodology, we use 72 structured interviews with RBC beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries, and serve semi-structured interviews with street-level and mid-level bureaucrats with a role in the implementation of the program. We use the Atlas software program to code the interviews. Now I'll show the results. First, I will present the implementers' views and then the beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries' point of view. So as shown in the literature, bureaucrats tend to classify the beneficiaries as deserving or not deserving of the policy, and then adopt discretionary attitudes that restrict the participation of the undeserving. And what you could notice is that the judgments about eligibility were based on extra-official characteristics. And an illustrative example of this perspective was provided by a social assistant bureaucrat, and she explained that due to limited resources, the employees of her department conducted home visits selectively and focused only on those beneficiaries who raised some suspicions regarding the eligibility for the basic seat-size income. And during these visits, they tried to see if the beneficiary possessed a good car or a good house, because if so, according to her, it could imply that they did not deserve the benefit. Here it's important to note that these visits are exclusive to the social assistance department in the city, and they don't seem to happen very often due to the scarcity of resource. And as I mentioned before, the program experienced waves of registration, and the most recent wave was in November of 2019, and since then, some potential beneficiaries are waiting for registration to open. And to deal with this high demand, the Secretary has created a waiting list, and new beneficiaries are included as another beneficiaries die or leave the program for some reason. And approximately 10 people are included per month, but there is no official rules that determines how the inclusion of new beneficiaries should be done outside the registration period. So it's up to the bureaucrat to interview, to allocate people in the list and establish the necessary criteria for this. And to do this, she explained that she prioritizes people with health problems because she considers them more vulnerable. But we don't know, but during the official registration period, it appears that the majority of people were successfully registered. So this can be a specific case. And the RBC does not have any conditionality, but some officials communicated to beneficiaries that during the registration process, they should provide a school statement as a proof that the children in the family is attending school. On the other hand, other bureaucrats clarify that RBC has no conditionalities, and even if they personally disagree with this notion. I will elaborate on this matter in the upcoming slides, highlighting how this confusion about the program rules can create uncertainty among the beneficiaries. But here it's important to highlight that the scale of the requests for additional documents during the registration process is currently unknown. So this can be a specific case too, as the waiting list I presented before. And there is good news on the beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries. Beneficiaries report stigma decrease over time, so this can be related with the bigger number of people using the currency in the city, and other programs also using the local currency. But there is some caveats. The enrollment process receive a lot of criticism, and they explain, and the criticism is related with the inclusion and exclusion errors and the perceptions of unfairness, because it's not clear why some people are including the benefits but others not. And there is also a sensation of perceived scarcity of the seat-size basic income. And people also complain about the bureaucracy with the enrollment process. A lot of people complain it was closed for far too long, and there is reports of unofficial documents being requested for the registration, like the school declaration, as I said before, and there is in this quotation from a non-beneficiary, and a voter registration card. So to finish, there is a space for discretion, but it is small and restricted to a specific case. and bureaucrats seem to use discretion as a coping mechanism to deal with limited resources. So the home visits are restricted to suspicious cases and fraud allegations. And there is also the unofficial waiting line that was induced by the close enrollment process. And bureaucrats mostly still prefer to keep an eye on beneficiaries with conditionalities, even if the program don't have conditionalities. The stigma reported by beneficiaries decrease over time with program expansion, but the wave enrollment leads to unfairness feeling. So to sum up, the transition from a targeted minimum income program with conditionalities to the seat-size basic income as we know today leads to stigma decrease. But the space for discretion and stigma could be greatly reduced if there was a continuous enrollment for the program. Here are the reference, and to finish, here is the research project website into the QR code and our emails for contact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica Maldonado, for your beautiful presentation. And now, Leah Hamilton, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. Took me a minute to unmute. Hi, I'm Leah Hamilton. I am a professor of social work in North Carolina, and I'm also the principal investigator for the HudsonUP pilot, a 5-year pilot in Hudson, New York. This presentation is going to be findings for the 2nd year of the pilot. We launched in 2020, and this presentation takes us through data collected last year in 2022. Just a little bit of background on the HudsonUP pilot. Again, it launched in 2020 with 25 participants. It expanded to another 50 participants in fall of 2021, and a 3rd cohort was added in fall of 2022 with 53 participants. There's 128 total. For this presentation, just covers my discussions with the first 2 cohorts in 2022. I'm using a mixed method phenomenological design, so I survey people twice per year, and I also interview people twice per year. So both cohorts, the first 2 cohorts, are extremely diverse. We have a wide range of racial backgrounds, gender backgrounds, educational backgrounds, folks on average pretty low monthly incomes and pretty low savings. And we had people who were working full-time, who were working part-time, who were unemployed, maybe due to disability or parenthood status. So just like the city of Hudson, we have a pretty diverse sample with lots of different life experiences going on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things going on after 2 years in the pilot. So a lot of people in 2022 talked about how, as my doctoral students would say, life is still lifing, even if you're on a basic income. So there's a lot of external uncertainty in 2022. Inflation was happening. We're still dealing with the pandemic and the economic fallout from that. Inflation was becoming a significant issue. So a lot of people described being significantly affected by these larger economic events. One person said, we have inflation, the housing market is out of reach, and so it's not much time to buy a house. For some participants, that came from individual circumstances, not just larger economic issues. So, like I said, life is still life. And so people are having, either their own personal medical emergencies, or they're caretaking for ill family members, or they're going back to grad school, or they're, exiting unhealthy relationships. So life is still happening. Larger economic contexts are still happening to these folks. One graduate student who is also responsible for several family members with medical needs complains it's just a struggle to balance everything. And I talk about that because I think I went too far. I think it's really interesting what happens when all that external uncertainty meets a basic income. So everybody talked about how, there's is there external uncertainty, but basic income, receiving basic income gives me what one person called the undercurrent of stability. For example, one person said, past 3 months, I've just had nothing. This person is an artist, completely dependent on art sales. Everything's just nosedive. Every day I'm like, oh man, I'm so glad I got HudsonUP. I try to think of my situation if I didn't have that, and how would I be figuring it out? Reminds me of other times when I've had real lows and didn't have that backup. I had to borrow money from friends or family or be late on my bills. And a lot of people were able to really contrast that to the times in their lives before they were on a basic income. So for one person said, even with my husband not being able to work, at least I've been able to stay stable, not have to worry about my next meal or whether I'm going to get evicted or those types of things, which I've had in the past. Also in this slide, I included employment rates for the two cohorts, climbing or remaining steady for the first two cohorts because they can launch small businesses or they can, get a more reliable car to get a better job, those sorts of things. So it's really helping people work towards their employment goals. So people, speaking of which, people also talk a lot about the progress they're making towards their goals. The stability created by HudsonUP, despite these sort of larger economic uncertainties, has allowed people to make progress towards their goals little bit by little bit. Progress is slow, especially if you have complicated life situations happening. But for example, one person said, even if it's $100, a couple hundred, I see how much I can contribute every month. They're talking about their savings. So my present self is taking care of my future self. Some participants reported that thanks to the stability, they were now able to pursue some lifelong dreams. Like one person, for the first time after 2 years of discussions, told me, I'm a writer. I haven't really pursued it to the fullest, so I'm going to be able to dedicate some time to it. I see that sort of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When your basic needs are met, food, shelter, you can start thinking about like these self-actualization goals like creativity. And again, another artist in a pilot said, it allows me to be the artist that I need to be. Sometimes artists will talk about not having to take on like odd jobs that take away time for their creativity, be able to focus on their art. People's savings is increasing over time, and we do see in this chart like some kind of fluctuations in savings rates for cohort 1. And because I have small n's, don't put too much weight in any of this quantitative data because there's a strong lack of statistical significance. But I think what we're seeing here is one, people's savings are growing slowly but steadily. However, there was a Bureau of Economic Analysis that showed that national personal savings rates dipped significantly in 2022. Inflation was happening. People were dealing with a lot of extra expenses that they had to dig into savings for. And, luckily people on basic income were able to have that backup for those emergency expenses. People also talk about stability in their health. By and large, almost all participants talk about how they had continued stability in their physical and mental health. Everyone's healthy and happy. I was able to go to the dentist and get a bunch of dental work done. We see stability in their survey responses of their health. And relatedly, a recurring theme in every wave of data collection is people talking about the improvements to their mental health and how it just receiving a basic income just reduces their stress. I can view my life in a more positive light now that I have money. It's just having that peace of mind in the back of your head that if something does happen, I have a little plan B or a backup option. Having that peace of mind just makes me a little calmer. With HudsonUP, I could prioritize my mental and emotional health. Oops, I'm sorry. And I went back too far. Okay. So in the summer of 2022, I decided to ask people who had been in the program for 2 years about their what they thought about a national basic income now that they had experienced it for 2 years. And there was strong positivity about it. One person said, I think the economy would be better. I think more people would be able to enjoy the nice sides of things and not always be catching up on bills. I feel like it would bring families closer. It might make a lot less stress for families, and which means that if the parents are less stressed out, the kids would be less stressed out because their parents aren't. I think everyone would benefit, at least in terms of emergency situation, especially nowadays, the economy is so terrible. So having that backup just for stability. People also talked about how, in my interviews, how it sort of facilitates connectedness and generosity with people around them. So when people were asked about their lives, they talked about improved relationships with their friends, family, community. So for example, one person who was able to use the money on plane tickets to a family wedding overseas said it was nice being at the wedding with my parents. We were able to really connect, and I was able to spend time with them and connect with them in a way that was impossible before and I had never done before. Just amazing that if you're in the right space and you get blessed like this, how you become more grateful, more open, more compassionate, empathetic towards other people. I've always had these qualities, but it's heightened because, you know, you can do it without concern. Several people talked about feeling like they can help other people around them. HudsonUP has afforded me the opportunity to help others. Like if my child needs something, if she falls behind on something, I could jump in. It's not, I'd say it's nice to have the extra income so I can help my mom with whatever she needs. I can help my brother pay his mortgage. The gratitude for HudsonUP really permeates into different aspects of my life and my relationship with others, not even my family, but anyone I come across that asks for help. So people really talking about the generosity that they feel. So just real quick summary, you know, I see continued stability. I just talked to folks for a third year this past summer, haven't analyzed the data yet, but we continue to see people experiencing stability and steady progress towards their goals. Despite sort of larger uncertainty, we continue to see growth in their employment, savings, health outcomes. And there's participants in the pilot who have really complex personal circumstances, homelessness, disability, addiction, and those issues, you know, are complicated and they take a long time. And setbacks are an expected part of that process. But we see, you know, slow, steady progress for all of those folks. HudsonUP has allowed recipients to pursue lifelong dreams and become more connected and generous with those around them. And the experiences have really allowed them to think about the positive impacts that a UBI could have on others. And I will stop sharing there. Thank you very much, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Enrico, you're on mute.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So I was saying thank you very much, Lea Hamilton, for your nice presentation. We have already some questions in the group chat, so I will start to read them. The first is from Chloe Halpenny, and he's asking, so to Shayana, that she would love to know what you think a basic income would offer that could be different from the Canada Child Benefit in the context of your presentation.
This is a question that I think has come up a few times. And for me, I think the difference is that the Canada Child Benefit is more of a supplement rather than an income, something that could replace or really add to an income as a whole. The Canada Child Benefit is afforded to families. I think you can get up to $6,000 to $7,000 a year. Which of course is not enough. This is per child, but it's not enough to live off of. And the idea of the Canada Child Benefit is that having children just generally is expensive, and so that benefit is meant for to cover the cost of just having children, period, but not necessarily to cover the cost of just your basic living expenses as a person, as a family. So a basic income would really allow for parents' poverty and familial poverty to be addressed, although it has done great things addressing specifically child poverty, but is not necessarily robust or comprehensive enough to address familial poverty as a whole. So that's why I think a basic income would really add a lot more to this issue than the Canada Child Benefit has done already.
Okay, thank you very much. I already saw that Leah responded to a question in the chat. So I have already some questions for each presenter. How to start with Shania. So I was wondering if we can you mentioned the bureaucracy aspect of UBI in Canada. So I was wondering if it would be possible to analyze, The question is if we can analyze poverty in a multidimensional aspect instead of absolute one when we talk about UBI related to children. Because you were talking about, for example, education, housing, and other aspects of daily life. So I was wondering, and I saw in your results, you were talking about national poverty, extreme poverty. So I was wondering if your analysis could analyze deeper in some specific aspects, or yeah, this.
Sure. So I do think that poverty is, of course, as we all know, very complex. And when you add the difference between who's receiving income in a family versus who isn't, and whose responsibility it is to care for the children and provide for the children, it adds another layer of complexity, which I think is often overlooked. And I think regardless of whether or not we're talking about child welfare intervention or just child poverty, period, both have lifelong problems and consequences that have to be addressed, and the basic income is one aspect of doing so. But this is, again, a common thing where a basic income will not be the silver bullet solution to this. There has to be programs and just general living costs and health care that is accessible to families and to children and so on and so forth. So the thing that I always think about, I had worked with a client who was being investigated by child welfare services. She had a little baby and she was told to go to parenting classes, but she could not afford a babysitter to then attend these parenting classes. So if she had a basic income, she might be able to afford that babysitter. But then the other aspect is just looking at affordable childcare in general also needs to be a part of this wide range solution. So a basic income, I think, would free up a lot of time and possibilities for families to just sort of be able to afford these basic things. But at the same time, access to education, access to healthcare, access to childcare, those things also need to be reformed in such a way that is accessible to families and children to really address intergenerational poverty and trauma.
Okay, thank you very much for your exhaustive response. I could have a question now for Jessica Maldonado, and that is about bureaucracy. Sort of have a confusion before. So you mentioned about Bolsa Famiglia, and I really liked that you mentioned about bureaucracy and the cost of bureaucracy. So I was wondering if in your future analysis, for example, you can consider to quantify the cost of bureaucracy of the current system, the current policy, Bolsa Famiglia in Brazil, and the UBI, that I think is one of the most important now aspects on the debate of UBI.
Sorry, if I understand correctly, you mean if we expect to compare the Bolsa Famiglia bureaucracy and the UBI?
Yeah, so you mentioned in your analysis that, for example, that of course UBI will cut all the bureaucracy costs compared to the Bolsa Famiglia, for example. So I was wondering if it would be possible in future analysis to quantify in Brazil how much the government spends for Bolsa Famiglia and how much will just save money using the UBI.
Yeah, we didn't think about that. We didn't actually not think about that with the seat-size basic income in America, because it would be a great thing to quantify the difference between the seat-size basic income and the UBI, because we present the seat-size basic income as a UBI policy, but it's not exactly. It's not all the population in America. They do not receive the benefits, and it's not perfectly individual. We say that it's individual, but the family receive one person, the family receive the benefits, the card for all the family. So first, it would be interesting compare the UBI and the city-size basic income with this kind of difference, and of course compare the Bolsa Família program and then the UBI, because Bolsa Família is a large program, but it's very focused on low streaming income, and this can generate some difficulties to the bureaucracy, because to focus on the extremely low income, you have to monitor the households, and there is also the conditionalities on education and health, and this can be expensive too, and it could be less expensive in the case of UBI. So I think it'd be a good work. We do not did this in this article, but I think it's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. And last question is for Leah Hamilton. So I was looking your analysis that you were mentioning 2022 for your analysis. So my general question is about do you think that your results are different compared to the existing literature in UBI, that you are made the analysis after the COVID-19 pandemic. So you just starting analysis in a context of economic recession after pandemic. So you mentioned also inflation, for example. Do you think that your results could be different to the current literature, or do you find that they are in line? About, for example, I was really captured about, for example, community building that you mentioned, and savings.
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's a really unique context. They started the program in the middle of a pandemic, and then we've been, mostly through a pandemic, the whole program, and then, economic conditions last year. So in some ways it is really unique. But one, I don't see huge differences from the basic literature. People's health is better. People are able to overcome, whatever crises are thrown at them. The people, they're able to focus on what they need to do. I think, honestly, I think that national crises, global crises like a pandemic, let more people see what a lot of people are going through all of the time. People who are living in economic uncertainty are facing crises all the time. And something like a pandemic is just casting it in a lot more people's attention. So what I see is that, like I said, life is life, and people are going through these crises, whether it's in, pilots of the 1960s or today, that basic income is just sort of smoothing those crises and allowing people to weather those storms. There's an article a few years ago that's been stuck in my head, that escaping poverty takes nearly 20 years of nothing going wrong, because you don't have a safety net to get through, just your car dying on you or some sort of major medical expense, right? So whether it's a pandemic or whether it's some sort of major medical emergency, just having an income floor is I think what we're seeing in across all of these pilots is just having that little bit of cushion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Leah. And I leave the floor to any other questions from the audience, if there are. Or in case I have a very practical question that is more about policymaking, that we are talking about UBI and everything, and I would like to ask to presenters if they think that consider all the aspects, so economic, social, and political aspects of the universal basic income. Universal basic income will be possible one day in their own country. You can start to answer whenever you want.
I'll go ahead and answer. I think, Leah has talked so much about how impactful the pandemic was. And one thing that we often talk about, at least in Canada, that comes up is how quickly the government was able to dole out emergency benefits to people during the pandemic. So many people received monthly living allowance who were laid off during the pandemic, and it really shows that when the political will is there, that it definitely is very quick and easy to be able to support people with their income. And so I do think that it is possible. I think it is feasible, but whether or not the will to actually implement it is there, and as well as sort of the general societal understanding of what this policy is and what it means and what it doesn't mean is there, then it's absolutely possible. And I think it's growing and growing and growing in terms of people are calling for it more and more in Canada, for sure.
I'll piggyback on that, since the Canadian and US situations are somewhat similar. So I absolutely agree that like the pandemic demonstrated that if there's a will, there's absolutely a way. I think that like I'm the older I get, the more jaded I get, probably. I think that what we're going to see is incremental growth. I mean, if at least in the US context, we had these sort of negative income tax trials in the 1960s, and that movement fell flat eventually, but we got out of it with an expanded earned income tax credit, which is like a tax credit that helps people who are working but have low incomes, and also it expanded our disability support program. So what I take away from that lesson is that that will probably make incremental progress, at least in the US context. And I think that's okay. Like, you know, history is littered with good ideas that weren't tested very well. Right? So I think it's okay to move slowly and incrementally, as much as I want to see a true universal basic income tomorrow. So my prediction, when I have to make a prediction about this in the US context, is we had a really successful expanded child tax credit for about 6 months in this country. That's pretty popular, and there's still a growing movement. If I had to predict, I would say that we would probably see expansions to families with children in the US before kind of the movement moves on to something else and the American political pendulum swings back the other direction. Jessica, what about?
I think in the case of Brazil, it was possible even before the pandemics, because we have the Bolsa Família for a long time, and we are accustomed to it. It's a large program, but it's not the UBI, as I explained before. So I don't know how it could be politically acceptable, because Bolsa Família, there is the conditionalities, for example. And what I see in Brazil is that people use it to like the conditionalities. They think people should go to school or have the health. I don't know how to say this in English, but that is the conditionalities on education and health, and people think the beneficiary should follow this. So there is this case of stigma. And about the feasible, in Maricá case, Maricá is a rich city, so they have a lot of money and they are using the best way they can. I don't know how this could be done in Brazil, that for UBI here we need the tax, we need to use the tax, and maybe we don't have the money that Maricá city has. So it's my only concern is about the feasible, but we are used to cash transfer problem. So I think it's possible, but by the same time, I'm afraid of if it's really possible. I don't know if I make myself clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, of course it was clear, and thanks a lot for your insightful thoughts. And I don't know if the audience has some questions. Okay, so I think in another case, we are ending sooner representation, but also unfortunately because we didn't have Luiz, Gustavo, de Cunha de Souza to present, so of course we missed one person. And in case the audience doesn't have any other question, I would like to thank all the presenters for their very nice presentations and for for the debate and everything on universal basic income. And yes. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you in other sessions. Bye bye.